The winter wind in the low quarter does not merely bite, it devours, stripping warmth from the bone and hope from the spirit in equal measure. In a city ruled by immortals who feel no cold, the shivering of the human poor is nothing more than background noise, a quiet static beneath the music of the high courts. But on a night when the frost was thick enough to crack stone, a young woman named Elara does the unthinkable. She stops. She sees the child freezing in the alleyway, his skin turning the color of bruised violets, and she unravels the only thing of value she owns, a thick, woolen scarf knitted by a mother she buried 3 years ago. She wraps it around the boy, tucking the ends in with trembling fingers, whispering that he will be warm, that he matters. What she doesn't know is that the shadows behind her are not empty. What she doesn't know is that Valerius, the vampire king, a sovereign who hasn't felt a spark of genuine curiosity in 4 centuries, is standing 10 feet away. He watches the heat leave her body to save another, a transaction of pure altruism that defies every selfish law of his court. And when she stands up, shivering violently, she turns not to find an empty street, but the eyes of a predator who has just decided that this rare, fragile warmth is something he will burn the world to protect. The cobblestones of Foundry Street were slick with a treacherous glaze of black ice. Elara pulled the collar of her threadbare coat tighter against her throat, but the fabric was worn thin, offering little more protection than paper against the biting gale. Her shift at the scullery had run late again. 12 hours of scrubbing grease from copper pots for coin that wouldn't buy a loaf of bread in the high quarter. Her hands were raw, chapped red and stinging where the lye soap had eaten into the cracks of her skin. She kept her head down. That was the first rule of survival in Oakhaven after dark. Eyes down, pace steady, breath quiet. To draw attention was to invite disaster. The vampires who ruled the city rarely ventured this deep into the slums, but their thralls did, and the desperate men who preyed on their own kind were just as dangerous. Hunger gnawed at her belly, a dull, familiar ache she had learned to ignore. All she wanted was her small room above the bakery, the thin blanket, and the sleep of the exhausted. Then she heard it. It was a sound so faint the wind almost carried it away, a chattering of teeth, rapid and rhythmic, like dice rattling in a cup. Elara hesitated. The instinct to keep walking flared hot in her chest. Don't stop. Don't look. You have nothing to give. She took another step, then stopped. The chattering didn't cease. It was accompanied by a soft, whimpering exhale. Against her better judgment, against every survival instinct honed over 22 years of poverty, she turned her head. Huddled in the recess of a boarded-up storefront sat a boy. He couldn't have been more than 7. He was curled into a tight ball, knees pressed to his chest, trying to make himself small enough to disappear from the cold. He wore only a ragged tunic, torn at the shoulder, and no shoes. His feet were buried in the dirty slush. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. He wasn't just cold, he was dying. She could see the lethargy setting in, the way his head lolled against the damp brick. She looked up and down the street. Empty. The windows of the houses above were dark, shutters drawn tight against the freeze. No one was coming. Elara approached slowly, her boots crunching on the frozen grit. "Hey," she whispered, her voice cracking from disuse. The boy didn't look up. He just kept shaking, a violent tremor that racked his small frame. Elara dropped to her knees in the slush. The cold wetness soaked instantly through her trousers, stinging her skin, but she didn't flinch. She reached out, touching the boy's shoulder. He was solid ice. "You can't stay here," she said, urgency rising in her throat. "You'll freeze." The boy's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, unfocused. He mumbled something unintelligible, his lips blue. Elara looked at her own coat. It was barely holding together. If she gave it to him, she would freeze before she made it 3 blocks. But she had the scarf. It was a heavy loop of crimson wool, the only vibrant thing she possessed. Her mother had knitted it during the last winter of her life, putting every ounce of her remaining strength into the tight, intricate stitches. It smelled faintly of lavender and memory. It was Elara's armor. She didn't think. She couldn't afford to think, because if she thought about how cold she would be, she might stop. With trembling fingers, Elara unwound the scarf from her neck. The instant the wool left her skin, the wind assaulted her throat like a razor. She gasped, the air burning her lungs. "Here," she whispered, leaning forward. She wrapped the crimson wool around the boy's neck, looping it twice, then pulled the ends down to cover his chest. She tugged it up over his ears, creating a cocoon of warmth. "Is that better?" she asked, rubbing his small arms vigorously with her rough hands. The boy blinked. The violent shaking slowed to a tremble. He buried his nose in the wool, inhaling deeply. "Warm," he croaked. "Yes," Elara said, her teeth beginning to chatter. "It's warm. Keep it tight." She stood up, her legs shaking. The cold was immediate and aggressive, sinking its claws into her exposed neck and chest. She wrapped her arms around herself, hunching her shoulders. She needed to move. She needed to run to generate heat. She turned to the street, ready to sprint the last mile home. And then she froze. She was not alone. Standing 10 feet away, beneath the flickering amber light of a gas lamp, was a figure. He was tall, impossibly so, wrapped in a coat of heavy black wool that looked soft enough to melt into. He wore no hat, and snowflakes caught in hair the color of midnight, refusing to melt. But it was his stillness that terrified her. Humans fidget, they shift their weight, they hunch against the wind. This man stood with the absolute, statue-like immobility of something that does not need to breathe. He was watching her. Elara's breath hitched. She knew what he was instantly. The preternatural grace, the pale skin that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. A vampire. And not just any vampire. The embroidery on his collar, silver thread worked into thorns, marked him as High Court. Terror, sharp and metallic, flooded her mouth. She dropped her gaze instantly, staring at his polished boots. "Forgive me, my lord," she whispered, her voice trembling violently. I did not see you." Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the wind howling through the eaves. Then the snow crunched. He was moving toward her. Elara squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the strike. Waiting for the cruelty that always followed their kind. "Please make it quick." "Why?" The word was spoken softly, a baritone that vibrated in the air like a struck cello string. It wasn't a threat. It was a question. Elara opened her eyes, keeping them lowered. "My lord." "You're shivering," the vampire said. He was closer now. She could smell him, a scent of ozone, crushed pine, and old blood. "You possess no gloves. Your coat is rotting at the seams. And yet, you gave your only source of warmth to a stray." He stopped 2 feet from her. The proximity made the air feel charged, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. "Look at me." It was a command, woven with a subtle power that hooked into her spine and pulled. Elara lifted her head. She found herself staring into eyes of fractured amethyst, purple irises shattered with flecks of silver. They were ancient eyes, weary and sharp, holding a depth of intelligence that made her feel like glass. "He was dying," Elara said, her voice barely audible over the wind. He is a child. And you?" The vampire tilted his head, a predator examining a strange new species. "Are you not cold?" "I am," Elara admitted, a violent shiver racking her frame. "But I can walk." He could not. The vampire stared at her. For a long moment, he did not blink. He seemed to be searching for the lie, the hidden angle, the performance. In his world, in the viper pit of the obsidian palace, no gift was given without the expectation of a return. Altruism was a myth told to gullible fools. But he found no deception in her. Just fear, and a cold so deep her lips were turning pale. "What is your name?" he asked. "Elara, my lord." Elara. He tasted the name, testing its weight. Then, he did something that made the breath seize in her lungs. He began to unbutton his coat. "My lord," she squeaked, taking a half step back. He ignored her. With fluid, graceful movements, he shrugged the heavy black garment from his shoulders. Underneath, he wore a tailored suit of charcoal velvet, pristine and terrifyingly expensive. He stepped forward and draped the coat over her shoulders. The weight of it nearly buckled her knees. It was heavy, lined with silk and fur, and it still held his body heat, a dry, furnace-like warmth that wasn't human. It smelled of him, overpowering the scent of the trash-strewn street. "My lord, I cannot." "Silence," he said, but the harshness was gone from his tone. He reached past her, his gloved hand extending toward the boy in the alcove. The boy, Leo, shrank back, his eyes wide with terror as he looked up at the towering figure. "Stand up, child," the vampire commanded gently. Leo scrambled to his feet, clutching Elara's crimson scarf tight. He looked to Elara for cues. She nodded frantically, terrified that any disobedience would end with them both drained dry in the snow. The vampire looked between them. "You cannot stay here tonight. The temperature is dropping. The frost will take the boy before dawn, scarf or no scarf." "We have nowhere else," Elara whispered, the warmth of his coat beginning to seep into her frozen bones, making her dizzy with relief. "You do now," the vampire said. He turned and raised a hand. From the shadows at the end of the street, a carriage emerged. It was a sleek, black monstrosity drawn by 4 horses that breathed mist into the night air. Their eyes glowed with a faint, unnatural luminescence. The carriage bore the crest of the royal house, a crown of thorns wrapped around a bleeding star. Elara's blood ran cold. The king. This wasn't just a noble. This was Valerius, the first of the blood, the ruler of the city. She sank to her knees in the slush, disregarding the cold. "Your Majesty. I did not know." Valerius looked down at her, his expression unreadable. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, not at her, but at the obeisance. "Stand up, Elara," he said. "The snow does not care for titles, and neither do I tonight." He offered her a hand. It was gloved in black leather. She stared at it. To touch the king was death. To refuse the king was death. She reached out. Her hand, red and rough, vanished into his grasp. He pulled her to her feet with effortless strength. "Get in the carriage," Valerius ordered, gesturing for the boy to follow. "Where are you taking us?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Valerius paused, his hand on the carriage door. He looked back at her, and for a fleeting second, the amethyst eyes softened. "Somewhere the wind cannot find you." The interior of the carriage was larger than Elara's entire apartment. The seats were upholstered in crushed velvet the color of wine, and a small, magical brazier glowed in the center of the floor, casting a golden heat that made Elara's skin prickle. She sat on the edge of the seat, clutching the lapels of the king's coat. Leo sat beside her, his small body practically vibrating with a mix of terror and awe. He was still wrapped in her red scarf, his eyes darting around the luxurious space. Valerius sat opposite them. He had not spoken since they entered. He simply watched them, his legs crossed, his hands resting lightly on his knees. He seemed to take up all the air in the carriage. Elara tried to make herself small, but the coat swallowed her. She felt ridiculous, a street rat draped in the garments of a god. "You are a seamstress?" Valerius asked, breaking the silence. His gaze was fixed on her hands. Elara looked down at her fingers, seeing the needle pricks and calluses. I work in the kitchens at the Gilded Chalice, Majesty. But I mend clothes for the neighbors when I can." "The Gilded Chalice," Valerius repeated, a distasteful curl to his lip. "Lord Malachi's establishment." "Yes, Majesty. He pays you poorly." It wasn't a question. "He pays what is standard for the low quarter," Elara said carefully. "And yet," Valerius murmured, shifting his gaze to the red scarf around Leo's neck, "you gave away your own protection." "He is a child," Elara repeated, as if that explained everything. "It wasn't a difficult choice. Wasn't it?" Valerius leaned forward slightly. The brazier light danced in his eyes. "In my court, Elara, choices are weighed by gain. To give is to lose. To sacrifice is to bleed." "Then your court sounds very lonely," Elara said. The silence that followed was deafening. Elara bit her lip, horror washing over her. She had just insulted the vampire king. Leo whimpered, sensing the tension. But Valerius did not strike. He did not call for the driver to stop. Instead, a slow, strange expression crossed his face. The corners of his mouth ticked upward, not in a smile, but in something thoughtful. "It is," he said softly. "It is profoundly lonely." The carriage rattled over a bridge, the sound of hooves changing from the dull thud of snow to the hollow echo of stone. Elara risked a glance out the window. They were crossing the rift, the chasm that separated the low quarter from the high quarter. Below them, the city fell away. Ahead, the obsidian palace rose like a shard of black glass against the moon. It was beautiful and terrifying, a fortress of spires and gargoyles. "What will happen to us?" Elara asked, her voice small. "You will eat," Valerius said simply. "You will sleep. And tomorrow we will see." "We cannot pay you," she said, clutching the coat tighter. Valerius laughed then, a low, dry sound. "I own the copper mines in the north, the shipping lanes in the east, and the very ground your hovel stands upon. Do you think I require your coin, Elara? Then what do you require?" Valerius looked at her, his gaze intense. "I require nothing. But I am intrigued." The carriage slowed, turning through massive iron gates that groaned open. Sentries in dark armor stood at attention. "We are here," Valerius announced. As the carriage halted, the door was pulled open by a footman in silver livery. The footman froze when he saw Elara and the dirty child sitting on the royal velvet. His eyes widened in shock. Valerius stepped out first. He turned, extending a hand to Elara again. "Come," he said. Elara stepped out into the courtyard. The air here was cleaner, sharper. The palace loomed over them, a mountain of stone. A tall man with hair like spun silver and a face of sharp angles approached rapidly. This was Silas, the king's advisor. "Majesty," Silas said, bowing low, though his eyes darted to Elara with open hostility. "You have returned. And you have brought pets?" Elara flinched at the word. Valerius's demeanor changed instantly. The curiosity vanished, replaced by a cold, imperious authority. He stood straighter, his presence expanding until it seemed to press down on the courtyard. "They are not pets, Silas," Valerius said, his voice like a whip crack. "They are guests under my personal protection. Prepare the blue suite in the east wing." Silas blinked, his composure slipping. "The blue suite? Majesty, that is in the royal corridor. Surely the servants' quarters." "Did I stutter?" Valerius asked softly. Silas paled. "No, Majesty." "Of course not." "Immediately." Valerius turned to Elara. "Go with him. He will ensure you are bathed and fed. No harm will come to you within these walls. I swear it by the blood." It was a binding oath. Even the lowest human knew that a vampire who broke a blood oath forfeited his life. Elara looked at the king, this ancient, terrifying creature who had plucked them from the snow. "Thank you," she whispered. Valerius did not respond. He turned and walked up the grand stairs, his figure cutting a lonely path toward the throne room. But as he walked, Elara noticed something. He was not wearing a coat. He walked into the freezing wind in only his suit, bearing the cold without a flinch, having left his warmth on her shoulders. The bath was the size of a small swimming pool. Steam rose from the water, scented with jasmine and rose oil. Elara sat on the marble edge, watching Leo splash in the warm water. His cheeks were pink again. The blue tint was gone. She had scrubbed the grime from his skin herself, refusing the help of the silent, wide-eyed maids. Now, wrapped in a towel that was fluffier than any cloud, she felt a strange sense of unreality. They had eaten roasted chicken, warm bread with honey butter, pumpkin soup. It was more food than she had seen in a month. But fear coiled in her stomach like a snake. Why? Why had he done this? The door opened, and a maid entered carrying clothes. "For you, miss." And the boy. The clothes were simple but fine soft wool tunics, clean trousers, thick socks. No silks or satins, which relieved Elara. She didn't want to look like a doll. "The king requests your presence in the library once the child is asleep," the maid said, not meeting Elara's eyes. Elara's pulse spiked. "The library?" "Yes, miss." An hour later, Leo was sound asleep in a bed so large he looked like a speck upon it. Elara kissed his forehead, whispering a promise that she would return, and stepped out into the hallway. Silas was waiting for her. He looked at her with thinly veiled contempt. "Follow me," he snapped. "And do not touch anything." They walked through miles of corridors. The palace was a museum of shadows. Portraits of dead kings lined the walls, their eyes following her. Silas stopped before a set of double doors carved from ebony wood. He knocked once, then opened them. "The girl, Majesty." "Leave us," Valerius's voice came from within. Silas bowed and retreated, closing the door with a heavy click. The library was a cavernous room, walls lined floor to ceiling with books. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, the flames roaring high. Valerius stood by the window, looking out at the snowy city below. He held a glass of dark red liquid. "Come closer to the fire," he said without turning. Elara walked toward the warmth. She felt small in the vast room. Is the boy safe?" Valerius turned. "He is guarded by 2 of my best sentries. No one will touch him." He took a sip from his glass. "Tell me, Elara, why did you stop?" "I don't understand," she said. "I have watched humans for 400 years, Valerius said, moving toward a leather armchair. "You are driven by self-preservation, fear, greed. In the low quarter, resources are life. You gave away your life." "Why?" "Because looking away costs more," Elara said. Valerius paused. He lowered the glass. "Explain." "If I walked past him," Elara said, her voice gaining strength, "I would have been warm tonight. But I would have had to live with the memory of his face. I would have had to know that I let him die to save myself a few hours of shivering. That kind of cold, it gets inside you. It doesn't go away." Valerius stared at her. The firelight cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp cheekbones and the weariness in his eyes. "I have not felt warmth in a very long time," he murmured, almost to himself. "Not the physical kind, but the other." He set the glass down. "You intrigue me, Elara. You are an anomaly in my data." "I am just a person, Majesty." "No," Valerius said, stepping closer. "You are a spark in a dark room." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the cool radiation of his skin. "My court is a nest of vipers," he said quietly. "They smile while they hold the dagger. They bow while they plot treason. I am surrounded by immortality, yet I see only decay." He dropped his hand. "I want to make you an offer." Elara held her breath. "An offer?" "Stay here. You and the boy. I will employ you. You will be the palace seamstress. You will be paid. You will be safe." "And in return?" Elara asked, bracing herself. "In return," Valerius said, his eyes locking onto hers, "you will not change. You will not become like them. You will simply be as you were tonight. Honest. Brave. You want me to be normal?" "I want you to be real," Valerius corrected. "I am starving for something real." Elara looked at him. She saw the power, yes. But she also saw the isolation. He was a king locked in a tower of his own making, watching the world through glass. "I accept," she whispered. "Good," Valerius said. "But be warned, Elara. The court will not like you. Lord Malachi will despise you. You are a mirror they do not wish to look into." "I have survived the low quarter, Majesty," Elara said, lifting her chin. "I can survive snobs in silk." Valerius's lips curved. A genuine smile, small and sharp. "We shall see." The first morning in the obsidian palace did not break with the golden promise of dawn. It arrived in a wash of gray light that filtered reluctantly through the heavy velvet drapes. Elara woke with a gasp, her body jerking upright in the unfamiliar softness of the bed. For a heartbeat, she was back in the drafty room above the bakery, waiting for the rats to scuttle across the floorboards. But the air here smelled of beeswax and lavender, not mildew. She looked to her side. Leo was still asleep, sprawled across the pillows like a starfish, his breathing deep and even. The blue tinge was gone from his lips, replaced by a healthy pink flush. Elara watched him for a long moment, her hand pressing against her chest where her heart hammered a frantic rhythm. It hadn't been a dream. A sharp knock at the door shattered the quiet. Elara scrambled out of bed, smoothing down the borrowed nightgown. "Come in," she called, her voice trembling slightly. The door opened to reveal Silas. The king's advisor looked as though he had swallowed a lemon whole. He held a bundle of fabrics in his arms, his nose wrinkled as if the very air in the room offended him. The king has instructed that you be set to work immediately, Silas announced, not stepping fully into the room. He believes idleness breeds insurrection. Elara stepped forward, shielding Leo from the advisor's cold gaze with her body. I am ready to work. Where do I go? The West Tower. The old solar has been converted into a workroom. You will find everything you need there. Silas thrust the bundle at her. These are the king's tunics. They require mending. Do not prick your fingers. Blood is complicating on white silk. He turned to leave, then paused, his hand on the latch. A word of advice, sewer rat. The king is amused by you today. But immortality is long, and his attention span is short. Do not get comfortable. The door clicked shut. Elara stood there, the heavy silk weighing down her arms. She looked at the closed door, then at the sleeping boy. I won't, she whispered to the empty room. I will survive. The West Tower workroom was a circular chamber of stone and glass, offering a dizzying view of the snow-covered capital. It was filled with dust motes dancing in the pale light, and the center of the room was dominated by a massive oak table covered in bolts of fabric, midnight blue velvet, crimson brocade, laces fine as spiderwebs. Elara spent the first 3 hours cleaning. She scrubbed the floors, dusted the mannequins, and organized the jars of buttons and spools of thread. It was meditative work, the kind that allowed her mind to unspool the knots of anxiety. Leo sat in the corner with a picture book a maid had brought, his eyes wide as he traced the illustrations of dragons and knights. Elara? Leo asked, looking up. Are the monsters here nice? Elara paused, a spool of silver thread in her hand. Some of them, Leo. Some of them are just lonely. Like the king. Yes, she said softly. Like the king. By midday, she had set up her station. She laid out Valerius's tunic, a garment of severe black silk. The stitching at the cuff had frayed. As she ran her fingers over the fabric, she felt a strange hum, a resonance in the material. It was imbued with protection spells. She could feel the static prickle against her skin. She threaded a needle with deft, practiced movements. This she understood. The world of courts and kings was a terrifying labyrinth, but a needle moving through cloth? That was a language she spoke fluently. The door opened without a knock. Elara jumped, driving the needle into the pad of her thumb. She hissed, sticking the finger in her mouth instantly to stop the blood, remembering Silas's warning. Valerius stood in the doorway. He had shed the formal suit for a loose white shirt and dark trousers, his feet bare against the stone floor. He looked less like a king and more like a ghost haunting his own castle. I did not mean to startle you, he said, his voice low. Majesty, Elara said, dropping into a clumsy curtsy, hiding her injured hand behind her back. I was just starting on the tunic. Valerius walked into the room. He moved with a liquid silence that was unnerving. He ran a hand along the edge of the oak table, checking for dust. There was none. Silas tells me you scrubbed the floor yourself, he said. We have servants for that. My mother taught me that you cannot create something beautiful in a dirty room, Elara replied, her chin lifting slightly. Besides, keeping busy keeps the cold out. Valerius turned to look at her. His eyes found hers, and the intensity of his gaze made the air feel thin. The cold, he repeated. You speak of it often. It is the constant companion of the poor, Majesty. He stepped closer. Show me your hand. Elara froze. It is nothing. Elara. The command was soft, but it carried the weight of a mountain. Slowly, she brought her hand out from behind her back. A single bead of bright red blood sat on her thumb. Valerius stared at it. His pupils dilated, swallowing the amethyst iris until his eyes were almost entirely black. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a predatory hunger that made the hairs on Elara's arms stand up. She saw the muscles in his jaw tighten, a visible struggle against instinct. You are bleeding, he said, his voice strained. It's just a prick, Elara said, fighting the urge to run. She grabbed a scrap of white linen from the table and pressed it to the wound. It will stop. Valerius closed his eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. When he opened them, the blackness had receded, leaving only the weary purple. He looked exhausted. You must be careful, he said roughly. There are those in this castle who have less restraint than I. I will be, she promised. He gestured to the tunic on the table. I did not come for the shirt. I came because I require a suit for the winter solstice ball. It is in 3 days. 3 days. Elara blinked. Majesty, a full court suit takes weeks. Then you had best start measuring, Valerius said. He walked to the center of the room and held his arms out slightly. Elara stared at him. Now, is there a better time? She swallowed hard. She grabbed her measuring tape, a worn strip of yellow canvas, and approached him. Up close, he was overwhelming. He smelled of rain and iron. She had to step into his personal space, so close she could feel the unnatural chill radiating off him. Arms up, please, she whispered. He obliged. She wrapped the tape around his chest. It was broad, solid muscle beneath the silk shirt. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled the tape taut. You're trembling, Valerius noted. He was looking down at the top of her head. I am not used to being this close to power, she admitted, moving to measure his waist. Power is just a story we tell to make people afraid, Valerius murmured. Tell me, Elara. What do they say of me in the low quarter? Elara hesitated, the tape measure pausing over his hip. Do you want the truth, Majesty? Or the court answer? The truth. Always the truth. They say you are a monster, she said quietly. They say you drink the blood of virgins in golden goblets. They say you have a heart of ice that cannot break, only shatter. They use your name to frighten children into behaving. Valerius was silent. Elara looked up, terrified she had gone too far. But he wasn't angry. He looked resigned. A heart of ice, he repeated. Poetic. But inaccurate. Ice preserves things, Elara. My heart does not preserve. It merely waits. She moved behind him to measure his shoulder width. Her knuckles grazed the back of his neck. He flinched a sharp, violent jerk of his head. Elara jumped back. I am sorry. I didn't mean. Valerius turned slowly. His hand went to his neck where she had touched him. He looked bewildered. It wasn't pain, he said, his voice full of wonder. It was heat. Your hands are warm. I suppose they are. He looked at her hands as if they were magical artifacts. I have not felt warmth on my skin without burning for 400 years. The confession hung between them, intimate and terrifying. Elara realized then that beneath the terrifying reputation, beneath the ancient power, he was starved. He was a creature dying of thirst in the middle of an ocean. Then perhaps, Elara said, a boldness rising in her that she didn't understand, you should not keep the castle so cold. Valerius stared at her for a long moment. Then, the corner of his mouth ticked up. Perhaps not. The days bled into a routine. Elara worked feverishly on the solstice suit, midnight blue velvet with silver embroidery that mimicked the constellations of the winter sky. Leo played in the solar and Valerius visited. He came every day at sunset. Sometimes for fittings, sometimes just to sit in the corner chair and watch her sew. They talked. He asked her about the low quarter, about the price of bread, about the songs the washerwomen sang. In turn, she asked him about history. He told her of wars fought with swords of glass, of cities that floated in the sky before the Great Fall, of a time when vampires walked in the sun. But the peace was a bubble, and bubbles are destined to pop. It happened on the afternoon of the second day. Elara had run out of silver thread and, feeling brave, decided to venture to the storerooms in the lower levels. She left Leo napping and made her way through the labyrinthine corridors. She was passing the grand hall when she heard voices. An embarrassment, Malachi. He brings a stray dog into the palace and dresses it in velvet. Elara froze behind a pillar. She knew that voice. Lord Malachi. The vampire who owned half the tenements in the low quarter, including the one she had been evicted from 2 years ago. It is a phase, another voice answered, smooth, female, dripping with venom. That would be Lady Isit, a member of the High Council. He is bored. He plays with his food before he eats it. It makes us look weak, Malachi snarled. The humans are already restless. There are whispers of a resistance in the Iron District. If they see the king coddling a peasant, they will think he has gone soft. They will think they can rise. Then perhaps, Isit purred, the peasant needs to have an accident. to remind the king of the natural order. Elara's breath hitched. She pressed a hand over her mouth, her heart thundering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Not yet, Malachi said. Let him parade her at the solstice. Let the court see her filth. Then, when he is tired of the novelty, we will break her. And we will leave her body on the steps of the low quarter as a message. Elara turned and ran. She didn't care about the noise. She sprinted through the corridors, her lungs burning, not stopping until she burst back into the solar. She slammed the door and locked it, sliding down to the floor, gasping for air. Leo woke up, rubbing his eyes. Elara? What's wrong? She couldn't speak. She crawled over to him and pulled him into a fierce hug, burying her face in his neck. They were going to kill her. They were going to kill her to teach Valerius a lesson. She should leave. She should take Leo and run. But where? The snow was still falling. Malachi's men were everywhere in the city. The only safety was here, behind the monster who claimed to protect her. The lock on the door clicked. Elara scrambled back, shielding Leo, grabbing her heavy fabric shears as a weapon. The door opened. It was Valerius. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene instantly, Elara's pale face, the shears in her hand, the terror radiating off her like a scent. Who? He asked. One word. A drop of poison. Malachi, Elara whispered. And Lady Isit. I heard them. Valerius stepped inside and closed the door. He didn't lock it. He didn't need to. He was the lock. Tell me exactly what they said. Elara recounted the conversation, her voice shaking. She told him about the accident, about the plan to leave her body as a message. Valerius listened without moving. He was perfectly still, but the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost began to creep across the window panes, cracking the glass with sharp pings. When she finished, Valerius looked at her. His eyes were not amethyst, nor black. They were glowing with a faint, terrible luminescence. They think I am soft, he said softly. They think I have forgotten how to be king because I have chosen mercy. He walked over to her. He reached out and gently took the shears from her hand. You will go to the ball tomorrow night, Valerius said. What? Elara stared at him. Did you not hear me? They want to. They want to humiliate you, Valerius interrupted. They want to show the court that you are nothing. That you are dirt. He knelt down so he was eye level with her. For the first time, he took her hand in his, ignoring the flinch. His skin was ice, but his grip was solid, unshakable. So we will show them something else. You will not go as a servant. You will go as my guest. And you will wear a gown that makes the stars look dim. I don't have a gown, Elara said hysterically. I have a tunic and trousers. You are a seamstress, Valerius said, a fierce light in his eyes. You have access to the finest silks in the kingdom. You have 24 hours. Make yourself armor, Elara. Make them choke on their own envy. And if they try to hurt me? Valerius stood up. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch and coil around him, forming wings of darkness at his back. Let them try, he said. It has been a long time since I reminded the council why I sit on the throne and they kneel before it. The next 24 hours were a blur of adrenaline and needlework. Elara worked as if her life depended on it, because it did. She chose a fabric Valerius had brought from the vaults, a silk that shifted color like a stormy sea, gray turning to silver turning to violent violet under the light. She cut without a pattern, draping the fabric over her own body, pinning and stitching with a manic focus. She didn't make a court dress. Court dresses were stiff, restrictive cages of whalebone and crinoline. She made something fluid. Something that moved like water. High-necked to hide her pulse, long-sleeved to hide her shaking hands, but with a back that dipped dangerously low, exposing the spine a dare. Here is my vulnerability. Try to strike it. Leo sat by her feet, handing her pins, sensing the gravity of the moment. You look like a queen, he whispered when she held it up. No, Elara said, her eyes tired but hard. I look like a survivor. The night of the winter solstice arrived with a blizzard that howled against the stone walls. But inside the grand ballroom, the air was stagnant and hot, perfumed with heavy lilies and the metallic tang of blood wine. The ballroom was a sea of monsters and finery. Vampires in crimson and black, werewolves in rough-spun formal wear, fae with teeth like needles. They danced a slow, silent waltz. At the top of the grand staircase, the herald struck his staff against the floor. His Majesty, King Valerius of the House of Night. The music stopped. The crowd turned, a sea of pale faces looking up. Valerius appeared. He wore the suit Elara had made him, the midnight velvet fitting him like a second skin, the silver embroidery catching the chandelier light. He looked magnificent and terrifying. He did not descend alone. And his guest, the herald announced, his voice faltering slightly. Mistress Elara of the Low Quarter. Valerius extended his arm. Elara stepped out from the shadows. A collective gasp rippled through the room. It wasn't just the dress, though the dress was a masterpiece that shimmered with every breath she took. It was her presence. She was human. She was frail. But she stood with her head high, her hand resting lightly on the arm of the most dangerous creature in the world. Head up, Valerius murmured, his voice a low vibration she felt in her bones. Do not look at their feet. Look at their throats. They descended the stairs. Every step was a battle against the urge to faint. Elara could feel the hostility rolling off the crowd in waves, heat, jealousy, hunger. She saw Lord Malachi near the punch bowl. His eyes narrowed, his lip curling in a sneer. Next to him, a woman with hair like white fire, Isid, watched with a predator's calculation. They reached the floor. The crowd parted, creating a wide circle. Dance with me, Valerius said. It wasn't a question. He pulled her into the center of the room. The orchestra, terrified into obedience, began a waltz. Valerius's hand was firm on her waist. He moved with a grace that made Elara feel weightless. For a moment, she forgot the eyes watching them. She forgot the threat. She only felt the strange, electric connection between her hand and his shoulder, the way his gaze held hers, shutting out the world. You are shaking, he whispered. I am terrified, she whispered back. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He spun her, the dress flaring out like a storm cloud. Do you see Malachi? Yes. He is coming over. Elara's stomach dropped. What do I do? You stand, Valerius said. And you speak. The music faded as Malachi stepped into the circle. He broke the protocol, interrupting the king's dance. A hush fell over the room so deep Elara could hear the candles burning. Majesty, Malachi said, bowing with mocking exaggeration. A delightful performance. It is, quaint, to see you engaging in charity work. He turned his gaze to Elara. His eyes were red, rimmed with gold. And you, little mouse. Did you sew that dress yourself? It smells of the slums. The insult hung in the air. Elara felt Valerius tense, ready to strike. But she squeezed his shoulder, a silent signal. Wait. She released Valerius and took a step toward Malachi. She was a foot shorter than him, mortal, fragile. But she thought of the boy in the alley. She thought of the mothers freezing in the tenements while this man drank wine in a warm castle. It is true, Lord Malachi, Elara said, her voice clear and ringing in the silence. I sewed it myself. My hands are rough from work. I smell of the slums because that is where I live. That is where your tenants live. She took another step. Malachi looked surprised. He hadn't expected the mouse to speak. But tell me, my lord, she continued, does the rent you collect from the starving taste sweeter than the wine? Does the coin you wring from freezing widows keep you warm at night? Because I may smell of the slums, but you smell of rot. The room erupted in whispers. No one spoke to a high lord that way. Malachi's face twisted into a mask of fury. His fangs descended, sharp and gleaming. You insolent little. He raised a hand to strike her. The movement was a blur. There was a sound like a cracking whip. Suddenly, Malachi was on his knees. Valerius stood over him, one hand wrapped around Malachi's throat, lifting the vampire off the floor until his toes dangled. I believe, Valerius said, his voice a low, terrible rumble that shook the glass in the windows, that the lady was speaking. He squeezed. The sound of Malachi's windpipe straining was audible. You forget yourself, Malachi, Valerius hissed, leaning in close. You think because I have been quiet, I have been asleep. You mistake boredom for weakness. He threw Malachi backward. The Lord crashed into a table of crystal glasses, shattering them in a spectacular explosion of shards. Valerius turned to the room. His eyes were blazing. "Let this be known," he roared, his voice filling the cavernous hall. "Elara is under my protection. Her words are my words. Her safety is my safety. Any hand raised against her will be removed from the wrist." He looked at the trembling crowd. "The long winter of my indifference is over. Pray, I do not find more rot in my court." He turned back to Elara. The rage vanished from his face, replaced by that same intense curiosity, now mixed with something else. Respect. He offered her his arm. "Shall we continue our dance, Mistress Elara?" Elara looked at Malachi groaning in the glass shards, then at the king. She took his arm. "I think," she said, her legs trembling, but her voice steady, "I would prefer some fresh air." The balcony door shut behind them, severing the noise of the ballroom with the finality of a guillotine blade. The silence that followed was instant and absolute, filled only by the high, thin whistling of the wind around the stone spires. Elara leaned against the stone balustrade, gasping for air as if she had been holding her breath for the last hour. The cold was a physical blow, stripping the heat of the ballroom from her skin, but it felt cleansing. It felt like truth. Valerius stood a few feet away, looking out over the city. The rage that had transformed him in the hall was gone, replaced by a rigid, terrifying stillness. His hands gripped the stone railing hard enough to powder the mortar. "You are shaking again," he said, not turning around. "The adrenaline is fading," Elara admitted. She hugged herself, the silk of her dress offering little protection against the sub-zero wind. "And I have never seen violence like that." Valerius turned slowly. His face was a mask of pale marble, but his eyes were churning amethyst storms. "That was not violence, Elara. That was restraint. Violence would have been painting the walls with his blood." He walked toward her, removing his velvet coat as he moved. He draped it over her shoulders, covering the exposed skin of her back. The warmth of the garment was heavy and instant, smelling of him, ozone, old paper, and something darker, like iron. "You made enemies tonight," she whispered, pulling the lapels tight. "I have always had enemies," Valerius corrected. "Tonight, I simply gave them a reason to stop smiling." He reached out, his gloved hand hovering near her cheek before he seemed to think better of it and pulled back. "I put a target on your back. I should not have done that. My anger, it got away from me." Elara looked up at him. "You defended me. In the low quarter, no one defends anyone unless they want something. You asked for nothing." "I am a king," Valerius said, his voice bitter. "I always want something, even if I do not know what it is." He looked down at his hands, the hands that had nearly crushed a High Lord's throat. "You asked me once why I was so cold. It is because caring is a weakness, Elara. It is a crack in the armor where the knife slides in. Tonight, I showed them where I am vulnerable." "Me?" Elara asked, her heart skipping a beat. "I am the vulnerability?" Valerius looked at her, and the intensity of his gaze stole the breath from her lungs. "You are the first thing in 400 years that has made me want to burn the world down just to keep it safe." "Yes, Elara. You are the vulnerability." He stepped back, the moment shattering as he retreated into his formality. "Come. The cold will take you if we stay. And I have work to do. If Malachi is plotting, I must be ready." The next morning, the palace was a hive of hushed whispers. Servants stopped talking when Elara walked by, their eyes darting to the floor. She was no longer just the stray. She was the king's favorite, the woman who had caused a High Lord to be thrown through a table. Elara tried to ignore it. She went straight to the nursery where Leo was being kept. She found him sitting on the floor, building a tower out of wooden blocks. A guard stood by the door, not a regular sentry, but a member of the Shadow Guard, Valerius's elite personal unit. The guard nodded to her as she entered. "Elara." Leo scrambled up and ran to her. "The man with the silver hair brought me a toy soldier." "Silas." Elara raised an eyebrow. "He said it was to keep me quiet," Leo said cheerfully. "But it has a real sword." Elara hugged him, checking him for any sign of distress. He was warm, fed, and happy. It was a miracle. But the knot of anxiety in her stomach wouldn't loosen. The door opened and Valerius entered. He was dressed for riding, high leather boots, a fitted tunic, and a sword strapped to his hip. "Good morning," he said. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept, if vampires even slept. "Majesty," Elara said, standing up. "Is everything all right?" "Malachi has left the city," Valerius said without preamble. "He has retreated to his estate in the Iron District. It is a sign of war." Elara paled. "Because of me?" "Because he is a power-hungry leech who has been waiting for an excuse," Valerius corrected sternly. "Do not take credit for his ambition." He walked over to the window, looking down at the courtyard. "I must leave the palace. There are meetings with the guilds that cannot be delayed. If I stay holed up here, it looks like fear." "You are leaving us?" Elara asked, a spike of panic in her voice. Valerius turned. "I am leaving you with the Shadow Guard. The palace is a fortress. You will be safe." He crossed the room and stopped in front of her. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small object. It was a whistle, carved from black bone. "If you are in danger," he said, pressing it into her hand, "if the guards fall, if you are alone, blow this. It is enchanted. No matter where I am, I will hear it. And I will come." Elara closed her fingers around the cool bone. "I will keep it safe." "Keep yourself safe," Valerius murmured. He looked at Leo, then back at her. For a second, he looked like he wanted to say more. Instead, he turned and swept out of the room, his cape billowing behind him like a storm cloud. With Valerius gone, the palace felt different. The shadows seemed longer, the silence deeper. Elara busied herself in the solar, working on mending the heavy velvet drapes that Silas had sent up. It was busy work, meant to keep her out of the way, but she didn't mind. Around mid-afternoon, there was a knock at the door. It was a maid Elara hadn't seen before. She was young, with nervous eyes and hands that twisted in her apron. "Mistress Elara?" she squeaked. "Lady Iset, she requests your services." Elara frowned. "Lady Iset?" "The woman who wanted me dead. She says she has a gown that requires emergency repair for the council meeting tonight. She says if you are the king's seamstress, you should be able to fix it." It was a trap. It had to be. "Tell her I am busy," Elara said. "Please, miss," the maid whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "She said if I didn't bring you, she would take my sister to the blood-cellars." Elara went cold. The cruelty of the High Court knew no bounds. She looked at the terrified girl. If she refused, an innocent would suffer. "Where's the dress?" Elara asked, standing up. "In her chambers. The East Wing." Elara grabbed her sewing kit. She patted the pocket of her dress, feeling the bone whistle Valerius had given her. She also grabbed her heavy iron fabric shears, tucking them into her belt under her apron. "Take me," she said. She instructed the shadow guard to stay with Leo. "Do not open the door for anyone but the king," she ordered. The guard nodded, his face grim. Elara followed the maid through the winding corridors. The East Wing was opulent, dripping with gold leaf and crystal, but the air smelled stale. They reached a set of double doors painted with white lilies. The maid opened them and gestured Elara inside, but she didn't follow. She fled down the hallway as soon as Elara stepped over the threshold. The room was a boudoir, filled with mirrors. Lady Iset sat at a vanity table, brushing her long, white hair. She saw Elara in the reflection and smiled, a sharp, predatory baring of teeth. "The little mouse enters the cat's den," Iset purred. She didn't turn around. "You threatened your maid," Elara said, keeping her hand near her shears. "That is beneath even you." Iset laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I threaten no one. Humans are so easy to manipulate. A suggestion of pain and they dance." She stood up and turned. She was wearing a dressing gown of sheer silk. "I do have a tear, however. My favorite writing habit." She pointed to a pile of emerald velvet on the bed. Elara walked over to it cautiously. She examined the fabric. There was a clean slit down the side, as if cut by a razor. "I can fix this," Elara said. "But I will do it here. I am not taking it to the solar." "Of course," Iset said, walking over to pour herself a glass of wine. Work here. I like to watch. Elara threaded a needle, her senses on high alert. She worked quickly, her stitches invisible. As she sewed, she noticed something odd. The lining of the habit was thick, unusually so. Her fingers brushed against something stiff inside the lining near the hem. Paper. Elara didn't react. She kept her face neutral. Why would a high lady have paper sewn into her writing habit? Isit was looking out the window, distracted by something in the courtyard. Elara made a split-second decision. She used her small embroidery scissors to snip a tiny hole in the lining, slipped 2 fingers in, and pulled out the folded scrap of parchment. She shoved it up her sleeve in one smooth motion, then stitched the lining shut before Isit turned back. Done, Elara said, biting the thread. Isit turned, her eyes narrowing. So fast? Perhaps the king is right about your talent. She walked over and ran a hand over the seam. It was flawless. You may go, Isit said, waving a hand dismissively. But Elara? Watch your step. The stairs in the palace are notoriously slippery. Elara didn't bow. She turned and walked out, her heart hammering against the stolen paper in her sleeve. She didn't go back to the solar. She ducked into a small alcove near the library, checking to make sure she wasn't followed. With trembling hands, she unfolded the parchment. It was a map of the palace. But it was marked with strange symbols in red ink. And there were times written in the margin. North Gate, midnight. Solar, 3 a.m. Nursery, dusk. Elara's blood froze. Nursery, dusk. She looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of blood orange. It was dusk now. The diversion with the maid. The dress. It wasn't about killing Elara. It was about getting her away from Leo. Leo, she gasped. She ran. She didn't care about noise. She hitched up her skirts and sprinted through the corridors, the bone whistle clutched in her hand. She reached the corridor leading to the nursery. The shadow guard was gone. The door was ajar. No, Elara whimpered. She burst into the room. The room was a wreck. The toy blocks were scattered. The bed was overturned. And standing in the center of the room was a figure dressed in the gray livery of the household staff, holding a struggling Leo with one hand and a rag over his mouth with the other. It was a man, but his eyes were glazed empty. A thrall. A human mind controlled by a vampire. Let him go. Elara screamed. The thrall looked at her. He didn't speak. He just tightened his grip on Leo, who was eyes rolling back in his head. The thrall began to move toward the service hatch, a dumbwaiter large enough for a child. Elara didn't think. She brought the bone whistle to her lips and blew with everything she had. No sound came out. It was silent to human ears. But the thrall flinched as if struck. Elara didn't wait for Valerius. He was in the city. He would be too late. She pulled the heavy iron shears from her belt. She wasn't a warrior. She was a seamstress. But shears were designed to cut through thick wool and leather. She charged. The thrall tried to fend her off with one hand, swinging a heavy fist. He struck her in the shoulder, sending a shockwave of pain down her arm that nearly made her drop the weapon. Elara stumbled, falling to her knees. Elara! Leo's muffled scream came from behind the rag. The thrall turned back to the dumbwaiter, shoving Leo inside. Elara scrambled up. She lunged, not for the thrall's head or chest, but for the hand holding the dumbwaiter door. She drove the points of the shears downward with all her weight. The metal bit deep into the meat of the thrall's forearm. He howled, a sound that was horribly human, and released the door. Leo scrambled back, falling onto the floor. Run, Leo! Get under the bed! Elara shouted. The thrall turned on her, eyes burning with a command that overrode pain. He backhanded her, a blow that sent her flying across the room. She hit the stone wall with a sickening crunch and slid down, darkness dancing at the edge of her vision. The shears lay 5 feet away. The thrall advanced on her, drawing a knife from his boot. Master says no loose ends. Elara tried to move, but her ribs screamed in protest. She scrabbled backward, her hand searching for anything, a block, a book. The thrall raised the knife. Then the window exploded. It wasn't opened. It was shattered inward. A blur of darkness and fury tore through the glass, bringing the winter's storm inside. Valerius hit the floor in a crouch, and in the next millisecond, he was between Elara and the knife. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a monster out of legend. His face was distorted, fangs fully extended, eyes glowing like dying stars. The thrall froze, the knife trembling in his hand. And Master Malachi said. Valerius didn't let him finish. He moved faster than thought. He grabbed the thrall by the throat and the belt, lifted him effortlessly, and threw him. The thrall flew across the room, through the shattered window, and out into the empty air of the 300-foot drop. His scream faded quickly. Valerius stood panting, his chest heaving. He turned slowly to Elara. The monster faded, leaving a terrified man. Elara, he choked out. He felt his knees beside her. His hands hovered over her, afraid to touch. I heard the call. I was across the river. I flew. Leo, Elara rasped, pointing to the bed. Valerius looked. Leo was peeking out from under the mattress, shaking but unharmed. He is safe, Valerius said. Because of you. He looked at the bruise already forming on her cheek. A low, dangerous growl built in his chest. They touched you. I'm okay, she whispered, though breathing hurt. It was a distraction. The map. She fumbled in her sleeve and pulled out the parchment. They have a plan. Malachi, he isn't just hiding. He's invading. Valerius took the map. His eyes scanned it, and his expression turned to ice. This is not just an invasion, he said softly. This is a coup. And they are using the tunnels beneath the palace. He looked at her, his eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying intensity. I cannot leave you here. The palace is compromised. The guards were removed. Where do we go? Elara asked. Valerius scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He gestured for Leo to come. The boy ran and latched onto Valerius's leg. Valerius picked him up too, holding the child in one arm and Elara in the other. We go to the one place Malachi will not look, Valerius said. We go down. To the crypts of the first kings. The descent was a blur of stone stairs and damp air. Valerius moved with supernatural speed, carrying them deep into the earth, far below the cellars, below the dungeons. They emerged into a vast, circular chamber lit by glowing lichen. Massive stone sarcophagi lined the walls. The air here was still and silent, heavy with the weight of centuries. Valerius set them down on a stone bench. He stripped off his cloak again, wrapping it around both of them. We are safe here, he said. The dead do not betray. He knelt before Elara, gently touching her bruised cheek. His fingers were trembling. I failed you, he whispered. I promised protection and you bled. You came, Elara said, covering his hand with hers. You heard the whistle. I heard your heart, Valerius admitted. Before the whistle, I heard your fear. It echoed in me. He looked at her, and the barrier between them seemed to dissolve. The king was gone. Only the lonely, ancient soul remained. Elara, he said softly. When I saw him standing over you with that knife, I felt something break. I thought I had forgotten how to feel terror. I was wrong. Valerius, she said, using his name without the title for the first time. He leaned his forehead against hers. The contact was shocking, cold against warm. I cannot fight a war while I am terrified for you, he whispered. I need you to be able to protect yourself. Truly protect yourself. How? He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. There is an old law. A bond. If I share my strength with you, not turning you, but a bond of blood. You would share my senses. My speed, to a degree. You would feel when danger is near. A bond? Elara asked. It is permanent, Valerius warned. It means I will always be in your mind, and you in mine. You will never be alone again. But it will paint a target on you that can never be removed. Elara looked at Leo, huddled under the cloak. She looked at the map Valerius had thrown on the ground, the map of a war that was coming for them. She looked at Valerius, this powerful, broken creature who had flown across a city to save her. Do it, she said. Valerius hesitated. Elara, think. It binds your life to mine. If I die, you shatter. I made my choice in the snow, she said firmly. I am not going back to the cold. Give me the strength to fight beside you. Valerius nodded slowly. He brought his wrist to his mouth and bit down. Dark, crimson blood welled up. Drink, he commanded softly. And open your mind. Elara took his wrist. She hesitated only a fraction of a second. Then, she pressed her lips to the wound. The taste was metallic, like copper and ozone. But as she swallowed, heat exploded in her chest. It wasn't the warmth of a fire, it was the heat of a star. She gasped, pulling back. The world snapped into focus. Suddenly, the dim crypt was blindingly bright. She could hear the water dripping 3 chambers away. She could hear Leo's heartbeat, thump-thump, thump-thump, slow and steady. And she could feel him. Valerius was a storm in her mind. She felt his age, a crushing weight of centuries. She felt his loneliness, a vast, dark ocean. And she felt his protectiveness, a roaring, white-hot fire that wrapped around her soul. She looked up at him. His eyes were glowing, and she realized hers were too. What is this? She whispered, looking at her hands. They didn't look rough anymore. They looked sharp. Welcome to the night, Elara, Valerius said, wiping his wrist. Now, we prepare for war. Recap. Valerius saved Elara and Leo from an assassination attempt by a thrall in the nursery, revealing a coup plot orchestrated by Lord Malachite using the palace tunnels. Realizing the danger, Valerius took them to the crypts of the first kings. To allow Elara to survive the coming war, Valerius initiated a blood bond, linking his life and senses to hers. Now, armed with the map and a shared consciousness, they prepare to retake the throne. The sensation was not like waking up, it was like being born into a world that was too loud, too bright, and vibrating with an energy she had never known existed. Elara gasped, clutching the edge of the stone sarcophagus. The damp air of the crypt, which had smelled of mold moments ago, now carried a symphony of scents, the iron in the water dripping 10 feet away, the dry decay of the ancient bones, the ozone crackle of Valerius's power standing beside her. And the sound. She could hear the scuttle of a beetle in the corner. She could hear the wind howling far above the earth, muffled by tons of stone but still audible. But loudest of all was him. In the back of her mind, a door had been kicked open. Through it poured a dark, turbulent ocean of emotion that wasn't hers. She felt a fierce, terrifying protectiveness that wrapped around her heart like steel wire. She felt a cold, calculated rage. She felt the weight of 400 years of silence. Breathe, Valerius's voice said, but she heard it twice, once in her ears, and once echoing directly inside her skull. Filter it. Do not let the flood drown you. Focus on me. Elara squeezed her eyes shut and focused on the connection. She envisioned a thread of silver light tying her to him. Slowly, the sensory chaos receded, settling into a heightened, crystal-clear awareness. She opened her eyes. The gloom of the crypt was gone. She could see perfectly in the dark, every crack in the stone, every fiber of the velvet cloak. I can hear everything, she whispered. You are borrowing my senses, Valerius said. He looked pale, the bond having taxed him, but his eyes burned with a ferocious resolve. And my strength. But you are still mortal, Elara. If they cut you, you will bleed. If they strike you, you will break. Speed is your armor now. He turned to the map spread on the floor. Malachi will not expect us to come from below. He thinks I have fled the city or barricaded myself in a tower. He will be moving to secure the throne room to declare a regency. He wants to claim the crown tonight, Elara said, her finger tracing the red line of the tunnels. Before the solstice moon sets. Then we must be there before he sits, Valerius said grimly. He looked at Leo, who was watching them with wide, frightened eyes from the bench. Valerius walked over to the boy. He knelt, not with the stiffness of a king, but with a surprising gentleness. Leo, Valerius said. Do you see this statue? He pointed to a carving of a sleeping knight on a sarcophagus lid. This was King Thorn. He was the greatest defender this city ever knew. I need you to stay behind him. There is a ward here, a magic shield. As long as you stay in this circle, Nothing bad can see you. Nothing bad can touch you. Will you come back? Leo asked, his voice trembling. Valerius looked at Elara, then back to the boy. I swear it. He stood up and turned to Elara. From the pile of weapons stored in the crypt, ancient blades kept for emergencies, he selected a short sword. The steel was dark, folded 1,000 times, light but unbreakable. I cannot wield a sword, Elara said. You do not need to duel, Valerius said, strapping the belt around her waist. You need to survive. If anyone comes near you, you strike. The bond will guide your hand. He took her face in his hands. The connection flared a rush of heat and reassurance. Are you ready to take back your city, Elara? Elara felt the fear, yes. But beneath it, fueled by the bond, was a cold, hard anger. Malachi had hunted a child. Malachi had tried to kill her. Malachi was the reason the low quarter froze. Yes, she said. The ascent was a nightmare of spiraling stone and darkness. They moved through the service tunnels, the hidden arteries of the palace that Malachi had planned to use for his invasion. But they were faster. Valerius moved like a wraith and Elara, to her shock, kept pace. Her legs didn't tire. Her lungs didn't burn. She felt light, as if gravity had loosened its grip on her. They reached the junction beneath the great hall. Elara stopped abruptly, her hand flying out to stop Valerius. Wait. She didn't speak the word, she thought it, and Valerius froze instantly. What is it? He whispered, his voice barely a breath. Heartbeats, Elara whispered back, pointing at the wall ahead. 3 of them. Waiting. And the smell of oil. Valerius's eyes narrowed. An ambush. They're expecting us to use the main stairwell. He placed his hand on the damp stone wall. If they like fire, let us give them smoke. He closed his eyes. Elara felt a surge of power leave him, not a physical force, but a mental command. The shadows in the tunnel seemed to thicken, to detach themselves from the corners. Go, he commanded the darkness. The shadows surged forward around the corner. A second later, Elara heard screams. Not of pain, but of terror. The ambushers were firing their crossbows blindly into the dark. Now, Valerius said. They burst around the corner. The 3 mercenaries, Malachi's hired swords, were flailing in a cloud of supernatural darkness. Valerius didn't even draw his sword. He moved through them like a wind. A snap of a wrist, a shove, a strike to the temple. In 3 seconds, the men were unconscious on the floor. Elara stared at them, her chest heaving. She saw the crossbow bolt lodged in the stone exactly where her head would have been if she hadn't heard them. The bond, Valerius said, checking the unconscious men for keys. It works. They have orders, Elara said, looking at a piece of parchment pinning to one man's tunic. Seal the doors. Let no one out. He is trapping the council inside, Valerius realized, his face darkening. He intends to force a vote at sore point. Then we have to hurry. The doors to the throne room were massive slabs of oak and iron, guarding the heart of the kingdom. 2 of Malachi's guards stood before them, heavily armored. Valerius didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He simply walked toward them, radiating a pressure so intense the air distorted around him. Move, he said. The guards hesitated. They looked at the king, disheveled, without his coat, eyes glowing, and then at each other. Instinct warred with orders. He is alone, one guard shouted, raising his pike. He is never alone, Elara said, stepping out from behind Valerius, her hand on the hilt of her short sword. The guard laughed. A girl. The laugh died in his throat as Valerius moved. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply caught the pike shaft, snapped the solid ashwood like a dry twig, and backhanded the guard with enough force to send him skidding across the marble floor. The second guard dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. Mercy, Majesty. I have a family. Then go to them, Valerius snarled. Run. The guards scrambled away. Valerius placed his palms against the massive doors. He looked at Elara. When these open, he said, his voice echoing in her mind, stay close to me. Watch the corners. Isit will be in the shadows. I am ready, Elara thought back. Valerius pushed. The doors groaned, the hinges protesting, and swung inward with a thunderous boom. The scene inside was a tableau of treason. The throne room was filled with the High Council, terrified and surrounded by Malachi's armed soldiers. In the center, on the dais, stood Lord Malachi. He was holding the crown of thorns, the ancient symbol of rule, hovering it over his own head. Lady Iset stood by the window, a smug smile frozen on her face as the doors opened. Every head turned. Valerius stepped over the threshold, Elara at his right hand. The wind from the open doors blew his hair back, revealing the predator's gaze beneath. "I believe," Valerius said, his voice cutting through the silence like a diamond cutter, "that seat is taken." Malachi lowered the crown, his face twisting in a snarl. "Valerius, you are late. The council has convened. They have declared you unfit. Absent in a time of crisis." "I was not absent." Valerius walked down the center aisle, the soldiers parting before him instinctively. "I was cleaning up the mess you made in my nursery." He stopped at the foot of the dais. "Put it down, Malachi, before I take the hand that holds it." Malachi laughed. "You are weak, Valerius. You play house with mortals while the kingdom rots. You have diluted your bloodline." He gestured to Elara. "Look at her. A seamstress. A gutter rat. Standing in the Hall of Kings. It is an abomination." "She stands there," Valerius said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, "because she has more honor in her little finger than you have in your entire lineage. Kill them." Malachi screamed, pointing his sword. "Kill the usurper and his pet." The soldiers hesitated, then surged forward. "Elara, back!" Valerius roared. The battle erupted. It was not a duel, it was a meat grinder. Valerius drew his sword, a blade of black steel that seemed to drink the light. He met the first wave of soldiers with a whirlwind of steel. He was faster than them, stronger than them, but there were dozens. Elara didn't stand back. She couldn't. A soldier flanked Valerius, raising a mace. Elara saw it before it happened, a flash of red intention in her mind. "Left!" She screamed mentally. Valerius ducked without looking. The mace smashed into the air where his head had been. He spun, cutting the soldier's legs out from under him. But another was coming for Elara, a vampire with wild eyes. Elara drew her short sword. The world slowed down. She saw the vampire's muscles tense. She saw the trajectory of his blade. She ducked, the wind of his strike cooling her cheek. She didn't try to block, she wasn't strong enough. She stepped inside his guard, using the speed Valerius had given her, and drove her sword into the gap of his armor, right into the thigh. He howled and dropped. Elara scrambled back, breathless. "Iset!" Valerius's warning screamed in her mind. Elara turned. Lady Iset was moving through the chaos, not toward Valerius, but toward her. She held a dagger that glowed with green poison. "You ruin everything," Iset hissed, her beautiful face contorted. "He was supposed to be broken by your death." Elara backed up, hitting the stone wall. She had nowhere to go. Iset lunged. Elara raised her sword, but Iset was a high lady, ancient and fast. She knocked the blade from Elara's hand. The sword clattered away. Iset grabbed Elara by the throat, pinning her to the wall. Her nails dug into Elara's skin. "Goodbye, mouse," Iset smiled. Elara couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in her vision. She flailed, her hand brushing against her belt. The fabric shears. She still had them. Iset raised the poison dagger. Elara gripped the heavy iron handle of the shears. She didn't aim for Iset's heart, vampire bone was too hard. She aimed for the eyes. With a guttural scream of effort, Elara swung the shears upward. Iset shrieked, dropping the dagger and clutching her face. She staggered back, blinded in one eye, blood streaming through her fingers. Elara fell to the floor, gasping for air. Across the room, Valerius heard the scream. He thought it was Elara. He turned, distracting himself for a fraction of a second. Malachi saw the opening. He didn't use a sword. He pulled a jagged crystal from his pocket, a bloodstone, an illegal artifact of dark magic. He crushed it in his hand and thrust his palm toward Valerius. A shockwave of red energy slammed into Valerius. It wasn't a physical blow, it was a disruption of the blood. Valerius crumpled, his sword falling from his hand. He felt his knees, clutching his chest, coughing up dark blood. The bond in Elara's mind screamed with his agony. "Valerius!" Elara cried out. Malachi walked down the steps, kicking Valerius's sword away. He stood over the fallen king. "You see," Malachi addressed the room, breathless. "He is weak. He falls." He raised his own sword for the execution strike. Elara scrambled up. She was across the room. She wouldn't make it in time. She couldn't stop the blade. But she was in his mind. "Valerius!" She screamed silently, pouring everything she had into the bond, her fear, her love, her stubborn refusal to freeze. "Take it. Take my strength." She felt a channel open wide. She felt her own energy drain out of her, leaving her dizzy, as if she had just run a marathon in a second. Valerius's eyes snapped open. They weren't purple. They were burning crimson. As Malachi's sword came down, Valerius caught the blade. With his bare hand. The steel bit into his palm, but he didn't flinch. He stopped the strike inches from his neck. Malachi's eyes widened. "Impossible. The stone drained you." "You forgot one thing, Malachi," Valerius snarled, his voice sounding like grinding stones. He slowly rose to his feet, forcing Malachi's sword upward, bending the steel. "I am not fighting for myself anymore." Valerius twisted the blade, snapping it in half. Malachi stumbled back, terror finally dawning on him. Valerius didn't use magic. He didn't use a weapon. He stepped forward and delivered a single, devastating punch to Malachi's chest. The sound of ribs shattering echoed through the hall. Malachi flew backward, crashing into the stone throne he had coveted so badly. He slumped there, broken, unable to rise. Valerius stood in the center of the room, chest heaving, blood dripping from his hand. He looked wild, magnificent, and terrifying. "Is there anyone else?" he asked softly. The room was silent. The soldiers dropped their weapons. The council members bowed their heads, trembling. Valerius turned. He didn't look at the defeated enemies. He looked for Elara. She was standing by the wall, pale and swaying, drained by the transfer of strength. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He caught her just as her knees gave way. "I've got you," he whispered, pulling her into his chest. "I've got you." "We won," she mumbled into his shirt. "Yes," Valerius said, resting his chin on her head, glaring at the court over her shoulder. "We won." The aftermath was a blur of activity, but Elara watched it from the safety of the king's private chambers. The loyal Shadow Guard had returned, securing the palace. Malachi and Isit were in chains, awaiting trial in the deep dungeons. Leo was asleep in the next room, safe and guarded by 3 sentries. Elara sat by the fire, a blanket wrapped around her. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a deep ache in her bones. The door opened. Valerius entered. He had washed the blood from his hands and changed into fresh clothes, but he looked different. The heaviness that had always hung around his shoulders seemed lighter. He held 2 mugs. "Hot chocolate," he said, handing one to her. "With cinnamon. I am told it is comforting." Elara took it, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. "Thank you." Valerius sat in the chair opposite her. He watched her for a long time. "You saved me," he said. "On the floor. I felt you. You gave me everything." "I told you," Elara said, taking a sip. "I don't like the cold. I wasn't going to let you go into the dark." Valerius leaned forward. "The bond, it is quiet now, but it will never truly break. You will always be part of the night, Elara. You can never go back to being just a seamstress." "I know," she said. She looked into the fire. "But I don't want to go back. The low quarter, it needs more than a seamstress. It needs a voice. And it shall have one," Valerius vowed. "Tomorrow, the council changes. Tomorrow, the laws change. No more starving children in the snow. No more landlords like Malachi." He reached out and took her hand. His skin was still cool, but it no longer felt cold to her. It felt familiar. It felt like home. "Stay with me," he said. "Not as a servant. Not as a guest. But as my conscience. My partner." Elara looked at him, The ancient king who had learned to feel again because a girl gave away a scarf. "I'll stay," she whispered. The winter had finally broken. The spring sun shone down on Oakhaven, turning the gray slush into rivers of clear water. The city was transformed. It wasn't perfect, poverty didn't vanish overnight, but the smoke rising from the low quarter was from cooking fires, not burning trash. Carts of grain and wool, stamped with the royal seal, moved through the streets daily. On the balcony of the obsidian palace, Elara stood watching the sunrise. She wore a dress of pale blue silk, simple but elegant, with a scarf of red wool tied around her wrist, a reminder. Leo was in the courtyard below, taking a fencing lesson from Silas, of all people. The advisor had surprisingly warmed to the boy, finding his lack of political guile refreshing. "You are thinking loud again," a voice said behind her. Elara smiled as Valerius stepped up beside her. He looked younger, the weight of centuries lifted from his eyes. He didn't hide from the sun anymore. He stood in it, letting the weak rays touch his skin. "I was thinking about the first night," she said. "How cold it was." "I remember," Valerius said. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "I remember a girl who thought she had nothing, giving everything away." "And I remember a king," Elara countered, leaning her head on his shoulder, "who thought he had everything, but had nothing at all." Valerius laughed softly, a sound that came easily now. He kissed the top of her head. "The winter is over, Elara," he whispered. Elara looked out at the city, at the people waking up to a world that was a little less cruel, a little more warm. She felt the bond hum in her mind, a golden thread of connection that promised she would never be alone again. "Yes," she said, watching the sun climb higher. "It is finally spring."